Welcome to Your Legacy Stories podcast. Your host, Natalie McQueen, helps people from all walks of life to create, live, and preserve their legacy for future generations to enjoy. Natalie's mission is to help you craft the legacy you deserve, encourage you to live it to the fullest, and then preserve it for future generations to enjoy. On this show, her guests share moments of purpose, gratitude, wisdom, and tradition, and of course, their legacy stories.
Well, hello everyone. This is Natalie McQueen with Your Legacy Stories. Today we have two amazing authors with their new book. We have Walt Carter and John Vinyard, and their new book is called Stop Driving Behind Idiots. So we have lots to talk about, and you are going to love what their book is all about. So thank you guys for joining me. And Walt, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Walt, and I've been around for a minute. Um, so I think John and I thought between the two of us, we've been leading people for over 90 years, maybe close to 100 now, and you know, uh, military officer out of college, former college football player, uh, multiple time CIO, chief marketing officer, chief digital officer most recently, led a bunch of digital transformations at three different big companies with a nationwide footprint. So I've done just about everything wrong that you could do as a leader at one time or and
I think you
probably
might
every
have done a few things right.
I tell you what, I think one of the things I know for sure is that I have done many things right. And one of the points of pride for me is I have a number of people, almost 15 people, that have been my direct reports at one time or another that have gone on to better positions, higher level positions than I've held. And so I feel pretty good about my ability to train leaders and to help them advance in their careers.
Perfect. And John, welcome. How about you? Tell
Well,
us about
I
yourself.
started my career. My background is manufacturing, and I started my career in Pratt Whitney Aircraft as a quality engineer on the jet engine manufacturing floor. I spent a year designing jet engines, even though I'm not an engineer, but it was a challenging assignment. And later in life, I was director of engine maintenance at United Airlines. I've been head of manufacturing for two different companies, Cadmus Communications and Ginkor Polymer Products. And one of the things I'm very proud that of one of the criticisms that both CEOs had of me, and that was they said I spent too much time on the shop floor.
Oh, wow.
Head of manufacturing. I'm sorry, but there's one way you find out what's going on. One of the things we talk about in the book is you don't find out what's going on 8 hours a day in your office.
Right. You got to be down in the pit and find out what's going on and relate to those people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So tell me why this book, why now, and what compelled you to write the story or be part of writing the story of Stop Driving Behind Idiots?
The title actually comes from an epiphany I had one morning in rush hour traffic in Atlanta, and I was watching a traffic accident unfold in front of me, and thinking, boy, what a stupid idiot, right? And then I realized, it's rush hour. All of these people are out here. Why? They're going to work. So if people go to work, they park their cars inside of our parking garages and our decks, and they go inside and they start to make decisions for our companies the same way they make decisions when they're behind the wheel. And then, the next thing I think I thought was, oh my God, right? How could we stop driving behind idiots? I guess, one of the other things, and this is, John and I met through a lady named Joe Weeks that has the pain and privilege of working for both of us at one time or another. And she thought, early on after she had been working with me for a while, she said, I learned how to do what I do from this guy named John Vinyard. Well, you and John have a lot in common. You should meet, right? And that was several years ago. Over those intervening years, though, we've found that we do really have a lot in common. And one of those things, John is just a very well-known Baldrige consultant that literally teaches, executive teams how to prepare and win ultimately the Baldrige Award. 17 of his clients have gone on to win the Baldrige Award, our National Quality Award. And I'll let John tell you a lot more about that. But, over the years, I, I mentioned at the beginning of my introduction, I'm a former Air Force officer. I actually grew up in the Air Force. My dad was a career man on the enlisted side. And his number one goal for me was to be an officer in the Air Force. That was the youngest programming I can remember. So in a way, I'm a lifer. I'm a full lifer in the
Right.
U.S. military. And what I found was, going through all of the things that I needed to do in high school and college to be, that perfect candidate for the military to become an officer. I wound up playing a lot of team sports, being in a lot of, big groups and organizations, and running for office as a leader in high school, early in college. And in every single one of those instances, I had a leadership system to guide me.
Okay.
Then I go into the Air Force, and you got one of the oldest, most codified leadership systems on the planet, where what's expected of you is very well defined. How you're going to be held accountable is extremely well defined, right? And again, your sense of order is well defined. There's another thing that didn't shock me so much until I got out, but there's an expectation in the military, just like there was in high school football and college football, that everybody on the team and everybody in the military is going to be a leader at some point.
Right.
And in every single one of those environments, the inversion from corporate America is we train you from the beginning as if you're going to be a leader. Because sooner or later you're going to be. In corporate America, it turns out you can be appointed to a supervisory role, and on the average, according to Harvard, it's 11 years later that you get your first training on how to be an effective supervisor.
Wow.
I thought it was shocking, but when I got out, I went to work for a big company, a very well-known name company. Everybody on the podcast will know the name of the company if I said it out loud. It's huge company. No leadership system anywhere in sight. Sink or swim environment. Whatever you do, do it, with all your might. But it is definitely, if you screw up, you're out. And there is no guidance for you along the way. You may have a good relationship with your boss, but you may not, right? John and I gave a presentation just this week, and I asked that audience. There was probably what, 60 people there, John? You think?
Yeah.
But I said, how many of you guys have ever worked for a bad leader, right? And almost every hand in the room went up, right? Well, how many of
Right.
you have had the pleasure of working for a really great leader? And there wasn't that many hands that went up, but there were a few, right? And so what you learn very quickly from the bad leaders, I think, is don't do that, right? Don't
Yeah.
don't do that, right? And yet I also think that the bad leaders are way too many, and we'll talk more about that later. But it should be more structured. So why write the book? To write the book is because every company actually needs a leadership system, and and every company needs to recognize that leadership happens all throughout the spectrum of the company. It doesn't just live at the top, right? It's not just the C-level leaders and the board. It's everybody that has a supervisory role, or as John has pointed out, could be a role model to others, right? You don't necessarily have to be an appointed leader. You can just be a leader that other people look to for guidance, or hey, this change is coming down. How do you think we should react to that, right? And and a lot of times it's not the appointed org chart leader that people look to for that. It's people that have been there for a long time, have a lot of experience, and have wrote it out.
Right. So that kind of
But
almost leads into my next question. And
can I tag
yeah,
on Walt a little bit on that, Natalie?
absolutely.
Um, when Baldrige first started, they found that the organizations were defining leadership as the top echelon of the organization. And they said, no, I mean, this is what Walt just said. Leadership has to be at every single level. If I'm at 4 in the morning and I'm a janitorial supervisor and supervising one janitor, am I a leader? Yes. Do I
Absolutely.
need to do all the things on this leadership system? Yes. I need to understand the stakeholder requirements. How fast do they want the hall cleaned? By when? What consists of clean? Do I need to understand the community requirements? Yes. Can I legally dump this water down the drain? Does the CEO have to set direction? Obviously. Everyone in between them does. And it was an epiphany for me. I worked for a very large organization, one of the ones I mentioned, and I remember walking into my boss's office with my quarterly performance results. And I remember thinking, I should be fired for making these. I made every result, but the situation had changed. It wasn't the same. I should be fired for making these results, but that's not the way the game was played. The game was played, you make your goals, end of conversation. And I had if you ask a leader, anybody that's listening to this, try this exercise. Walk through your organization and ask people, how were you taught to lead? And you'll get or a lot of times everyone will give you an answer. So what's the problem? The problem is none of them are the same. The organization doesn't have a systematic approach to leadership. I tell a story about we worked with a large company and did a Baldrige type assessment of every one of their key suppliers. And one key supplier was 25 people. And the CEO told us, this leadership system thing's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. There's only 25 of us. I don't need this. About 3 weeks later, she calls and she says, we have 5 leaders of the 25, and we're driving this organization nuts because every one of us lead differently. We need a leadership system. I've also told the story. I was dealing with an organization in India, 40,000 employees. 3 months after we developed the leadership system, we're at an executive briefing of about 300 of his top executives. I'm sitting in the first row. And he says, well, I knew developing a leadership system was a worthless paper exercise. The criteria required it. John forced me to do it, and I knew it had no use. I'm sitting there thinking, this isn't going well. Then he said, think about this, the CEO of a 40,000 person company. Then he said, then a $50 decision came across my desk. You can't have the CEO of a $40,000 company making $50 decisions. He talked passionately about their leadership system, how every leader at every level better lead in this way. And you better take 15 minutes at the end of the week to figure out how you did based on this leadership system and how you're going to be better. And if you have to take a decision to your boss, you better bring pros, cons, and a recommendation. Wow. So there's a 40,000 person company and a 25 person company.
That's incredible. I was going to ask the question, what does leadership look like in real time in a company, but then what is the biggest failure across the industry? But I think you pretty much answered that. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
I'd like Walt to mention the amount of money that the planet Earth and the United States of America spends every year on leadership training, because leadership training, and I've got a master's degree in management. They didn't teach me 10 seconds of leadership. The Army's got the greatest saying in the world. They said, no one's ever managed anyone into battle. And, but Walt, if you'd talk about the commitment that America makes to leadership training.
Yeah. One of the things that we found out was that, on the average right now, we're spending about $269 billion globally on leadership training for company employees. Most of that's here in the United States. Over 160 billion of that 269 is right here at home in the U.S. And yet, when you look at the exit, interviews for employees that are abandoning the companies, what you see most of the time, frankly, is a failure of leadership that is driving them out, right, and or making them feel like this is not the place for me, right. You have a lot of I think artificiality there. I will say, as a counterpoint to John's story about the CEO of the 40,000 person company, I was at a company that, we only had about, I guess around 1,000 employees. And yet right as I got there as a brand new member of the executive team, I was told we're rolling out this executive, coaching, employee coaching and performance management system, and Walt, you're a couple weeks behind now. You're going to need to catch up. But we're doing this thing, across the board, every department, and yours is included. I'm like, okay, great. Went read the book, got the trainers to come in and give me extra coaching, coached me up. I was like, wow, I really like this. This is one of the best coaching methods I've ever seen for really putting the ownership where it needs to be in terms of the employee supervisor interaction. Like, this is beautiful. And so, at a executive team meeting not terribly long after that, the team that had implemented the coaching for us came in and they said, well, unfortunately, for whatever reason, Walt's team is the only team that's still doing this months later. The rest of you guys, nobody's really using the tools.
Right.
And and behind the scenes, the guy that was in charge of the accounting team said, well, I I don't think this applies to accounting. I don't think I need to do this with accounting people, right? And another guy that led operations said, I didn't like the whole thing. I didn't think you needed all of that. So I pulled out the pieces that I thought were relevant and I put them in a spreadsheet. And I started to use that smaller, more condensed version, and then several other sales said, "Oh, no, no, we don't have time for all of that. We're too busy making our numbers." They weren't making their numbers, by the way, but we're too busy to coach people and help grow them. And so what the organization saw was, if the leaders aren't leading in the area that they suggest that you should be doing, they, in the world of IT, we have this phrase called eating your own dog food. If you're a dog food manufacturer, your dog should be eating your own dog food. They shouldn't be eating somebody else's brand. They should only be eating your dog food, right? If you work for Ford, you should be driving a Ford, not somebody else's car, right?
Right.
And so, are you behind the brand or not behind the brand? The leaders, if they're not behind a program and the employees figure that out pretty quick, they're not going to get behind the program either, right? No matter how good it is, right? By the way, this was 16, 17 years ago. I still use that coaching methodology today because it's still the best I've seen. But man,
Well, one of the things I'll chime in on is I've read at least 50, maybe 100 business books on leadership in my life. And when you get done, I don't know what to do and I don't know what order to do it in. I've got new perspectives. I agree with everything in it, but I've got a plaque in my office. I'm going to hold it up. I don't know if it'll project or not, but it's a plaque. Can you see that? It's engraved. It's an engraved
Nice.
aluminum plaque. And it says MMITIBSW, which stands for what I feel when I read a leadership book. My, isn't that interesting? But so what? I don't know what to do. And what our book, you say, why the book? One of our books is a leadership system says in this organization, step 1 is, step 2 is.
Right.
The arrow between step 1 and 2 connects it is, and you can't delegate that. It tells you the sequence of actions every leader needs to have and what a leader can't delegate. I cannot say, okay, I communicated clearly with the group and it's their job to understand it. I cannot delegate validating understanding.
Right. No.
First person. And I can't say, Tina really did a good job for us over there. Would you go motivate her for me?
Right.
I can't say that. I can't delegate it. And it doesn't make any difference if I'm a CEO or a janitor. I can't delegate it at any level. So I think I've made a bold statement. This is the first book ever written on leadership, even though the US spends $160 billion on leadership training, but none of it tells you what to do and the sequence. Now, the leadership system we present in the book is for one particular organization, and we say in the book who it is. They're a phenomenally good organization. And but it's not everyone's leadership book. We have an appendix that tells you how you develop your own.
Right.
Because you're going to have unique characteristics. I'm working with one group that's probably one of the most mission-focused groups I've ever seen. And about the third step of their leadership system, when you're ready to implement, and it could be at any level, you better personally verify this is the best thing we can do for our patient.
Mm.
And it's not what I was told to do. It's not what others are going to do. I have to do it. We've given 3 examples in the book of culture. One of them starts, it's about 2 pages of single-spaced lines. Every phrase starts with, I will. Not you, not everybody, not others. I will.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things we talk about in the book is culture is before all leadership actions.
Mm-hmm. What resistance do you think leaders face when trying to implement a system, and how can they overcome it?
I'll give you one example, and it's real world example. They are a Baldrige recipient, but when we designed their leadership system, and they have very, very good leader. I mean, visionary leader. Every award a leader could get, he's received. But he saw this as impugning his own leadership style. But once we convinced him, this is your chance to take your wisdom as a leader and put it in the hands of every leader at every level. Once he understood that, he was the biggest proponent in the world of it. I saw something else, and it's a organization we talk about in the book. The CEO was dead set against doing a leadership system. He was just absolutely adamant against it because he says, I've told him what it's important. I've told him what it's important. I've reiterated what's important. And the way we do it is we'll break them up in 3 different groups. We tell them what it is. We give them a lot of tools. And then they come back with 3 leadership systems and we combine them. I saw something that day I didn't think was remotely possible. And this was no sharing in between these rooms. They essentially came back with the same leadership system.
Oh, wow.
And he looked at that and he says, they're listening to me. Oh yeah, it became his. It became his big time.
That's great.
The other thing that kind of is the root of that story is you see a lot of guys and gals that get thrust into leadership because they're the best skilled person at their role, not necessarily because they're the best leader. We talk a lot in the book about the fact that most people are not natural born leaders, right? And so if you're not one of those natural born leaders, then how do you learn to be a good leader? And and if you are a natural born leader, it's really hard for you to teach leadership because everything kind of comes easy to you, right? And you instinctively do the right things, but you don't know how to explain it to somebody necessarily. One of the other reasons why we think that you ought to systematize your leadership is, well, first and foremost, all of that leadership training that we've talked about. A lot of times they'll come in with a model of leadership that says you need to lead like George Washington, right? Well, if you're General George Patton, you're not going to lead like George Washington. You're going to lead in a different way, right? And conversely, General George Washington, who also was an out front guy, right, would never use the kind of communication style of General George Patton, right? That, and then you could compare, I don't know how many different leaders that you could pick from the universe of renowned great leaders out there. Their styles are uniquely theirs, right? Which is why your leadership system at your company needs to be unique to your company, right?
Exactly.
And we think there's a profound notion there that says, and if any leader that I've ever talked to has had this experience where they've gone through, done a great job as a leader, and really got their group humming, really got peak performance, everything is good, and then the guy or gal that comes behind says, "Oh, I'm going to make my own mark here, and I'm going to undo a lot of that stuff that my predecessor did." don't really understand why maybe Walt did it that way, but I'm gonna go make it look more like the book says, right? The book says we should do it this way. I've had this personally happen, and it then you start getting the calls after you've left, going, "Hey, can you
Right.
your successor has really screwed everything up, right? Like, oh, how could they screw that up? So it was working so great. Why, eh, there's an ego motive that a lot of people have when they take on a leadership role. They want to make their own
Right.
mark, right? They don't necessarily want to just go let the predecessor get all the credit for the work they're doing today. So I have to make some changes, don't I, in order to get the credit to roll in my direction? And then the more the ego's in charge and the less that you're thinking about, well, my team needs this and my company needs my team to do this. If you start thinking about what do I need, my career, my advancement, then I think you screw that up most of the
Yep.
time.
Yep.
Walt, let me jump in on that and talk about organizations. If you as a leader don't leave systematic processes behind, the people, and we have a lot of 2x2 matrices in this book. There's probably a dozen of them for different perspectives. But one is you have to practice those processes and they have to be muscle memory. If
Yep.
you leave me that, I can do better with what you've done, because if I'm smart, I'm going to build on what you did and I'm going to do things that you didn't have time to do. If you're dumb, you're going to disassemble what they did and try to do something different. And I worked with a 4-star general that talked about his commands. And he says, my commands change every 2 years. They're on a cycle every 2 years because the commander changes. He said, I understand every commander wants to put their own fingerprint on it, but wouldn't it be nice if it was on an improvement slope?
Right. Oh, that's awesome. Well, I love legacy. My company is called Gifts of Legacy. So when you're thinking in the terms of legacy, what does leadership legacy mean to each of you personally?
I want to give a real life example, and Walt knows this person. He wrote an appendix to our book about it's in the book about how he changed the culture before he started Performance Excellence. But on his Baldrige site visit, the examiners got some of the doctors off and talking to him with nobody else there. And they said, what happens if Dave leaves? And Dr. Thacker, God love her, she says, nothing. So what do you mean nothing? He says, we love Dave. He's a talented leader, but we lead this organization with processes. And
Nice.
Dave's put those processes in place. And the new successor, whoever replaces Dave when he retires, will build on those processes. And I was thinking that I couldn't have written a better answer.
Yeah. Well, and Walt, you kind of touched on that you have been the leader and led people to go above and beyond and be even better leaders than yourself and have higher. So to me, that is a sign of a good leader when you can elevate people to win and move forward.
Yeah, I think it's ultimately the goal for all of us as leaders, and then even along the way to help those folks that have outgrown their current role in your organization with no real opportunity inside your organization to move to that next higher role. You have to help them find that next step when it's time, and don't try to keep a lid on their careers, because normally these are top performing people, right? And you want to hold on to your team, but at a certain point, you always got to say, yes, I do. I want to hold on to the team where it makes sense for everybody, where it's a win-win all around. But if it's a win-lose for either us as a company or for that individual as a performer, then we need to make a change, right? And if we have a system in place and we're really doing the things that our system requires, like for instance, succession planning is a big deal, right? And making sure I've got somebody that can step up and step in when the inevitable happens, because none of us are here forever, and none of us stay in role forever. So you just recognize the river's always flowing. What are you doing, right? What are you doing to help make sure that your organization has resiliency? The other thing, on the legacy question, I can't think of a better legacy than, to leave an organizational leadership system in place that's not just reflective of you as the top leader in the organization, but really reflects the hearts and the minds and the best thinking of everybody that's in a leadership role in the organization. And then, as John pointed out, because the river's moving, right, and things change, every one of those processes and procedures and and protocols that we put in place has an opportunity to be improved over time.
Sure.
And is in most organizations there is a threat every day to their market share, and or there's an opportunity. And many times what we see is companies have to adjust very quickly to the threat or the opportunity, or they miss it. And so again, every one of those is an opportunity to take a look at a leadership system and make it better given that threat or that opportunity, so that you move to the next level, right? And so that upward slope of leadership and performance goes hand in hand. The better the leaders, the better the performance over time. The worse the leaders, the lower the performance over time. So building a system that allows you to support that kind of sustained growth and improvement is a remarkable legacy. It's
We
remarkable.
designed a leadership system for an organization. Anybody on planet Earth would recognize the name of this company. And every leader had a copy of the leadership system on their desk. If you walked into one of their offices and said, okay, hey, I need to make a comment, they would literally look down, tell me what box we're on, because if it's not on here, I shouldn't be wasting my time talking about it.
Right.
Because this is what I do as a leader.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you both. This has been amazing. And if you have not got your copy, go onto Amazon and we'll put the links in below. But get your copy of Stop Driving Behind Idiots: Leadership Systems for Breakthrough Performance. Thank you very much.
Before we go, I want to show one thing. And this has been done in a lot of different organizations. I was just able to grab it quickly on my shelf. It's a little table tent that shows that company's leadership system, and this table tent set on every leader's desk.
Wow.
If it's not on there, I'm not doing it.
Very cool. Thank you guys. You guys are amazing. You're making better leaders all over the world.
I will be happy if I can help them not make all the mistakes I made.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Your Legacy Story Podcast. If you would like to share your legacy story with Natalie or get your legacy book started, please reach out at giftsoflegacy@gmail.com. Be sure to add My Legacy Stories in the subject line. We would love to help you share your legacy message out to the world. Natalie would like to invite you to join our private Facebook group, Create Your Legacy Life. She shares tips on book publishing, ways to create and leave your legacy, and she interviews the most amazing legacy creators, sharing their moments of purpose, gratitude, wisdom, and tradition, and of course, their legacy stories. See you next week.